Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 120. My name is Dr. David C. Noe, and I am here in Vomitorium South, deep in the bunker, hermetically sealed against all deleterious influences, with my good friend and fabulous co-host, Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. How are you this afternoon, Jeff?
I'm feeling good. I feel safe. I feel calm and content, sealed off down here in the bunker.
Right.
Yeah,
We've got our cans of Campbell's soup lined up against the walls.
Exactly, right.
Got our our instant water.
Yes.
Sorts of things we can use in case there's some sort of a literary fallout that comes upon us.
Exactly, right? So it's kind of an apocalyptic bunker. I also like to think of it as it's close to Superman's Fortress of Solitude,
Oh,
too.
really?
Right, it's kind of
Well, that was made entirely of ice.
It was.
Wasn't it?
I don't know, yeah.
How uncomfortable is that?
I mean, you go, where everybody wants to go to get away from it all, the Arctic, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Your property would be always diminishing, if I'm not mistaken.
It would be a bad investment.
There'd be melt,
It would,
right?
yes, exactly.
My investments are melting rapidly.
Right. But I do like to think of the bunker as kind of half survivalist,
Yes.
extreme survivalist.
You mean our bunker?
Our bunker, and half Fortress of Solitude. Right. So, yeah, with the soup cans, we also have connections with Jor-El from the planet Krypton.
Oh, really?
Advising us on the. Didn't you ever see the Superman movie?
Yes, I've seen, I think, all of them, unfortunately.
Really?
But what does soup have to do with Jor-El?
Well, on one side you have the soup.
Okay.
And on the other side you have kind of the 1978 video screen where Jor-El can give you advice from beyond the grave.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Speaking of the 1970s.
Yes.
This is possibly the best bunker.
about. What?
It could be the arch bunker.
Nicely done. I saw what you did.
Yeah.
I knew it was coming. I like
All in the family, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So what are we talking about today, Jeff?
Well, I was counting up. We started this
Yes.
Aeneid series almost exactly a year ago.
Arithmetic, eh?
Yes, and this is the 30th and final Aeneid episode.
No way.
Yes.
I don't believe either claim. Either that it is the 30th.
Yes.
Because it feels like the 68th. Nor that it is the final. I think we will find some way to squeeze yet another episode out of the Aeneid.
Really?
Yes.
Beyond this, we're not going to cover it all today.
I doubt it.
Okay, it just seems that 30 is such a nice round number.
That's true.
And it makes up the Aeneid episodes make up a full quarter of the episodes we've done total.
And what's a round number, by the way? One that's not going to have a jagged edge.
Yeah, exactly. It's got that nice. It's the nice zero. It's nice smooth on the end of
Won't
it.
splinter your finger.
Right.
Jagged, crusty O.
Yeah. So so you think this might not be the final Aeneid episode?
I think there's just so much material here of an interpretive nature.
Yeah.
And we have threatened the audience from episode 1 of this interminable series that we would spend a lot of time on interpretation.
Yes, okay.
And here we are wasting our breath on Archie Bunker.
What are we doing?
Carol O'Connor, right?
Right.
Okay. So, do we have a shout out?
I think we're another offer this week.
Right?
9.
No
okay.
grazie.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do?
We're going to ask the audience for a shout out.
Okay.
Continue to ask it for them. So
there have to be people listening.
There have to be, right? And they're just too shy. They just need to step forward.
Right.
We want to celebrate you.
That's correct.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Turn the spotlight away from ourselves.
Yes.
And on to the humble yet loyal listener.
And we should remind them because you don't have to have like a deep, intimate connection with the classics to get a shout out.
Or an interesting story.
Oh, no.
We don't have interesting stories.
Exactly right. So join the club.
Correct.
My goodness. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Should we get into this?
I think we should.
Okay.
Shall we give a quick overview of the things that are going to be covered here in this episode?
Go for it.
So we have Aeneas' return to battle.
Yep.
Juturna, who is once again Turnus' sister.
Yes.
And she's a nymph, right?
Right. She's a goddess of sorts.
Correct.
Yes.
She disguises herself. Aeneas attacks the city.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the tragic death of
Amata,
yeah. Lovey, right? Lavinia's mama takes her own life. Then finally the combat of Aeneas and Turnus. Jupiter and Juno reach to use the German rapprochement. Mm-hmm. And then finally
the death of Turnus,
yes,
which is the note on which the epic ends.
Correct.
Yes.
The sour note, the off note, the blue note.
Right. That's where I think a lot of our interpretive discussion will come in.
I think
that's
so.
Where a lot of the ink that has been spilled on the Aeneid has
been spilled?
Spilled in that general direction.
That's correct.
Yes.
The scholarly squids spill their ink in a variety of directions.
Indeed.
Okay, so the opening quote.
Yes.
You selected this, and yet little did you know that Carl Springer is an acquaintance of mine.
Oh, no way.
An internet acquaintance.
Is that right?
Yeah, this guy is a fantastic Latinist.
Is that right?
Yes.
Still kicking?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Last I knew, he was down in southern Illinois. I don't remember the exact name of the institution.
Okay.
But I kind of admire this guy, and here's why. He started out in classics. He got his bona fides, or fides, actually, here with such things as Vergil. And now he is publishing and translating things from the 16th and 17th centuries. So it's kind of like my story.
So he's kind of a rival of yours.
No, because he's older.
Okay.
I don't know how much, and much respected.
But you guys aren't stepping on each other's toes?
No,
like,
no.
Who's going to be translating Beza this week
No,
or whatever?
no, Beza.
Sorry.
Beza. What is wrong with you?
I stopped with Constantine.
Okay.
Right?
No, not a rival. Someone that I admire and from whom I would like the opportunity to learn.
Okay. All right. Well, this comes from an article of
Right.
his entitled "The Last Line of the Aeneid." And speaking of interpretive ink being spilled on the end of the epic, this is exactly what this is about. And so his thesis, just generally speaking, in his article is that says a lot of people call attention to how abrupt the Aeneid ends, and he says, well, okay, but if you compare it, if you kind of really cast your interpretive net widely,
I see.
it's not all that different than in this quote. We'll see it's not all that different than what we see in the Iliad, right?
Interesting.
Yes.
I'm eager to hear this. This is from the Classical Journal. Came out in May 1987. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Before your undergrad years.
Yes, just before.
Correct.
Yeah. And he writes, Carl writes, abrupt as the ending of the Aeneid is, however, it is important not to exaggerate its uniqueness. In point of fact, the Aeneid was not the only epic in antiquity which had no formal epilogue. The Iliad, upon which Vergil modeled the last 6 books of the Aeneid, also ends rather abruptly. Although Homer begins the Iliad by announcing his subject and naming his protagonist, the wrath of Achilles, in the last lines of the epic, the poet concentrates not on Achilles, but on Hector. Hector's name comes up 3 times in the last 22 lines of the Iliad. Achilles is never mentioned. In the first line of the Iliad, only Achilles' name in the genitive appears. In the last line of the poem, only Hector's, also in the genitive, is mentioned. Homer also leaves the reader with a number of questions still unanswered at the end of the poem. Achilles has at last, it seems, gotten over his anger, but the reader wonders what will happen to him now. Will he continue to fight even though Hector is dead? Homer could have made the ending less abrupt by indicating to the reader in a few additional lines that Achilles had learned an important lesson about anger in the course of the events described in the epic. If the poet had really wanted to provide the work with a sense of finality, he might even have foretold to his readers the death of Achilles at the hand of Paris. As it is, however, the ending of the Iliad strikes a rather uncertain note. The gamma epsilon particle in the final line suggests that something antithetical should follow. The reader feels that there is something more that could be told about Achilles and the rest of the Trojan War. What do you make of this?
I think it's really quite astute. I think it's quite astute, and it had not occurred to me before. It's brilliant, really. For example, will he continue to fight even though Hector is dead? Homer could have made the ending less abrupt by indicating to the reader in a few additional lines that Achilles had learned an important lesson about anger in the course of the events described in the epic.
Yes.
To me, that stands out because the fact that Homer does not do that makes it an immeasurably better work of literature.
Right.
There are not tidy endings.
Exactly.
Did you see the old Lord of the Rings films that came out in the early 2000s?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, all the 3 of them?
Yeah.
Right? One of the, I would say, salient criticisms of the 3rd film, Return of the King, is that it had 6 or 7 separate epilogues. Do you remember that?
I don't.
You have all of these reunions. The character of Frodo, Elijah Wood, is laying in his bed recuperating from all the terrible things of being on the slopes of Mount Doom or something like that.
Yeah.
If I could conjure up my Hugo Weaving voice.
It's right. Good.
And he is reunited with each of his friends who come in and wish him well, and they're happy to see he's convalescing, and all the loose ends are neatly tied up, right? Now, in one sense, that's very satisfying if you have a kind of fan approach to the literature, to the novel.
Yeah.
But if you approach it as something that is telling more profound truths, I would say it's less satisfying.
I would agree with that.
And the Iliad is not like that.
Right.
The Iliad leaves many strands untied. Of course, one of the biggest disappointments that students have when they come to the Iliad is that it's not about the fall of Troy.
No.
And neither is the Odyssey. It skips the horse, right, is only told in a flashback.
And in the Iliad, it's we're not even there yet, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a brief moment in year 9. It's about 51 days in year 9.
Exactly.
And so I think Springer is really onto something here.
Yeah.
And given that Vergil's two purposes in writing the Aeneid, according to the ancient commentaries, was first to rival Homer and second to praise Augustus back to his ancestors, an abrupt ending is a good rivalry of Homer.
Yeah.
He's following his model.
I totally agree with it. I think from that point of view, I really like Springer's argument. A couple of things that I would quibble with.
Okay.
Is when he says the audience left wondering what Achilles is going to do next. I think that in Homer's time, the traditions about Achilles and what happens to him, I think were probably in the water in that.
Sure.
It wasn't about suspense. It was about kind of who's telling this very familiar story in a way that's going to surprise me.
For sure.
But maybe the way he ends it
correct
is surprising, but not, we wouldn't be left, oh my gosh, what's going to be happening next? Because everybody knew what happened to Achilles.
True.
Right.
True. But within the confines of the work of art itself, right, it does open the question, why doesn't Homer tie up this loose end of Achilles?
Exactly.
I think part of it is Achilles hasn't learned anything about the dangers of anger.
No.
Right?
Maybe in a brief moment with Priam in the tent.
Well, but he's about to kill him, right? He says, look, I'll give you back your son, but don't push it, old man.
Oh, I'm going to draw my sword.
Correct, because I'm still just as angry as I was in book 1, line 1.
Right.
So don't push it.
He recovers a smidgen of his humanity, but it's not this. It's not this complete kind of come back down to earth moment.
Right. And characters are consistent.
Yes.
That's what I like. I don't like the fantasy fairy tale development of character. You go, in a few books from being a monster to being a philanthropist.
Right.
Doesn't happen. Yeah. So Jeff, what else would you like to say about Springer?
I think perhaps this is an unanswerable question, but in terms of like what the original audience would have been familiar with in terms of like he talks about the epilogue.
Right.
I think in Homer's day, most of the audience would have known the tradition of Achilles dying on the battlefield.
Right.
They know what's going to happen. With Aeneas, was Vergil's audience would have had also kind of, oh yes, we know what happens to Aeneas after this. I mean, I pulled I got some stuff here on our show notes from that reputable source at Wikipedia.
Right.
But even so there it's it talks about later traditions kind of pulling threads together that we kind of sort of know what happens to Aeneas afterwards, but it doesn't seem to have kind of this monumental importance of what happens to Achilles on the battlefield.
Yes, to that particular character. So before we go into Wikipedia, of which I am a great fan, not being facetious at all.
Me either.
I'd like to read a little bit of Brooks Otis, chapter 8.
Okay.
Bring him back in.
All right.
He says, there is no need for elaborate summary. The novelty of Vergil's work should now be clear. He had no real precedent for the Aeneid. Horace in the Ars Poetica had drawn a picture of what a real epic should be and had said in effect that the only proper model was Homer, not some disunified string of adventures or clea, glory tales, not another Timaeus or Argonautica, and above all, not history in epic close, but a unified poem in the high style with real heroes and gods. He thus discarded the whole post-Homeric past without really conveying any idea of how such an astounding return to Homer itself could be accomplished. And Vergil, as a poet schooled in Neoteric and Alexandrian doctrina, was certainly well aware that the Greek critics for whom he had most respect had long given up Homeric epic as a possible medium of effective poetry. So that seems to me both to reinforce Springer in some sense. Horace says, you can't judge by the stuff between Homer and our day what good epic is. You got to go to the source, right? So that kind of reinforces what Springer is saying. But I think it also reinforces your point a little bit in that Vergil was doing something really novel.
New,
and there was no precedent, including for what happened to Aeneas after the epic.
Right. Which would make, if we're comparing the endings of the Iliad and the Aeneid, the ending of the Aeneid makes it that much more haunting.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me share what Wikipedia has to say about like what happened to Aeneas after the action of the Aeneid.
And the Wikipedia, you know what the wiki stands for?
What does it stand for?
Well, there's two theories. One is that it's a Polynesian word that has to do with knowledge.
Okay.
And my source is Wikipedia. The other is that it stands for what I know is.
Is that right?
It's an acronym for what I know is.
Oh, okay. All right. I like the Polynesian one better.
Yeah, I do too.
I hope that's true. Well, Wikipedia says, the rest of Aeneas' biography is gleaned from other ancient sources, including Livy and Ovid's Metamorphoses. According to Livy, Aeneas was victorious, but Latinus died in the war. Aeneas founded the city of Lavinium, named after his wife. He later welcomed Dido's sister Anna Perenna, who then committed suicide after learning of Lavinia's jealousy.
Anna Perenna. That sounds like a gelato shop, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Off
right.
the Pantheon?
Right. Let's swing by. It's
Anna
a nice day.
Perenna's and pick up some gelato?
Right. I was unaware of this tradition that like Aeneas tries to, in some ways, kind of double down on the Dido episode. He feels so bad. Well, let me bring Anna over.
Right.
I don't know. But then she commits suicide because Lavinia is jealous. After Aeneas' death, Venus asked Jupiter to make her son immortal. Jupiter agreed.
So that's in Ovid.
Yes.
Right? He becomes the god Indiges.
That's right. Yep. The river god Numicus cleansed Aeneas of all his mortal parts, and Venus anointed him with ambrosia and nectar, making him a god. Aeneas was recognized as the god Jupiter Indiges. So,
not that exciting.
not that exciting.
You can see kind of why.
It's kind of funny. We just said, oh, he was made into a god. It's kind of
Meh.
pedestrian.
Well, this apotheosis, right,
Right.
the becoming of a god, is an overused trope.
Yeah.
I would say. But you can see maybe why Vergil left it out. Why include this kind of information? What does it add to the story?
Yeah.
Nothing. It adds nothing to the story. So I'm going to argue in favor of Springer's notion that the abrupt ending is not so unusual. It's purely Homeric, and thereby Vergil achieves a greater artistic accomplishment because he doesn't try to go beyond his material.
And I would agree. And I think I would also say that the ending of the Aeneid, to me, speaks to the interpretive bent that the epic itself is kind of equal parts queasiness and equal parts praise of Augustus.
Okay.
Right. So if this was going to be a full-blown praise of Augustus and the establishment of this new golden age that has come in, I think he would have added a little bit more.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, there's also the theory that it was unfinished in the sense that he wanted to do something else.
Right.
But I think we won't go into this. The comparison to the epilogue in Ovid's Metamorphoses, there Ovid praises Augustus in a fulsome fashion.
Right.
Now, people think that fulsome means full, but it doesn't. It means lick-spittle, right? It's a kind of, kissing someone's shoes, right? That's what fulsome means. It's too much.
Too much, yeah.
And there he says, I'm going to praise every god. I'm going to cite every god. And you, Augustus, may you never die. But if you do someday, right, then you become a god and I'll worship you too.
Right.
And it's so tongue-in-cheek. And Vergil couldn't do something like that.
No.
Because his theme was much more grand.
Yes. Yeah, weightier.
Right.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
So here comes the rage again, falling on my head like a memory.
Yeah, that's
what's going on.
Do you know the
here?
reference there?
I do not.
It's the Annie Lennox song. Here comes
Annie
the rain.
Lennox.
Yes.
Did she invent that fine china? Is that?
Lennox?
Yeah. That's fine china, isn't it?
Yeah, that has nothing to do with her. I'm sad to say.
Okay.
But, great female vocalist with the Eurythmics.
Kind of an alto.
Well, she could do it all.
Really?
She could sing kind of low alto to
Good
high
range.
soprano. Oh, phenomenal.
Something about Broken Glass.
Walking on Broken Glass.
Is that one of her songs?
hits. She also did a great cover of Whiter Shade of Pale.
Whiter Shade of Pale.
Yes, the Procol Harum, the band with the
I
Latin
know
title.
nothing of what you're talking about.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. This is. I'm going to get all agitated. We got to move
I
on.
imagine Johnny Pop, but this segment is entitled in her honor.
Yes, exactly right. So, if the listener will remember the previous episode, we were talking about how Book 12 proceeds. In the first half, we have an Aeneas who is, religiously correct. He seems kind of bent on trying to keep the peace. He wants to kind of be civilized. He wants to bring all of this to close in a kind of a law and order kind of way. But circumstances / fate decide otherwise. And it's at that middle point in the epic where we start to see him turn towards the rage. And that's what's going on here. So,
all right.
You want to read a little Latin to get
I would
started
love to.
off? Yes.
Beginning on line number 430. Il abadus pugnae surras incluserat auro, hinc at quinco ditque maras hastamque coruscat, post quabilis lateri clebius lorica quatergest, ascanium fusis circum complectitur armis, sumaque per galeam de libans oscula fatur.
Nicely done, as always.
Thank you.
All right, and here's Lombardo's translation with a little bit more. Aeneas was hungry for the fight. Impatient of any delay, he clapped golden greaves onto his shins. By the way, gold, a terrible metal for armor.
It's incredibly heavy.
It's heavy and it's soft too, right?
Is it soft?
It's soft. It's a pliable metal, but it's also very dense.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
it's kind of like me, soft and dense.
So he clapped on golden greaves onto his shins and started handling a spear. As soon as his breastplate was strapped on and his shield was fitted to his side, he put his arms around Ascanius, kissed him, lightly threw his helmet, and said, "Learn how to be a man from me, my son. Learn good fortune from others. Today my hand will defend you in war and lead you to great rewards. And when you come of age, see to it that you remember the example of your kinsman and that your father Aeneas, and that of your father Aeneas and your uncle Hector enliven your soul.
I love that. That's Iliad 6, right? Updated. That's the Scaean Gates.
Yes.
Hector and Andromache and Astyanax at the Scaean Gates.
Exactly.
Where Andromache and the kid's an infant, so there's a difference, are saying goodbye to Hector when he goes out onto the field to meet Achilles.
Right.
And the nurse is a part of that also, you remember.
That's right.
And when he puts on his helmet, Astyanax, also known as Commager, is afraid of his father.
That's right.
It's intimidating. So this is an updated version of the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to read a little bit more, just a little further on in the poem.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yes,
though?
please. Yeah.
The translation, very well done by Lombardo, indicates that Aeneas is kind of saying goodbye as though he's going to die. Is this just pro forma, or does he really fear the outcome of this conflict?
I think that at this point, I don't think he does. I think this is, I see this as Vergil as just kind of playing with the audience's expectations.
Okay.
Right? So the audience at this point, of course, well, they've known throughout that Aeneas isn't going to die, right? His fate has said otherwise. But Vergil seems to take delight in kind of these reversal of expectations. We see kind of a Hector here who survives. And we talked about last time too about, comparing Aeneas and Turnus, how there's this flip-flop of kind of who's playing the Hector role, who's playing the Achilles role.
Right.
But here, very clearly, Aeneas is playing the Hector role, but he's about to flip to Achilles.
Okay.
So that's the way that I see it.
I think that's right.
Right. So a little further on, so once Aeneas, so again, here with the passage we just read, Aeneas is, he's very much our civilized Aeneas. He's thinking about his son. He's thinking about posterity. He's thinking about this as kind of a life lesson for his son. But once he starts getting, knee deep in the battle, that's when kind of the rage takes over.
Okay.
So, I'll read here. His mind pulled in contrary directions, and meanwhile Messapus, treading lightly and carrying 2 javelins tipped with steel, rifled one of them at him with deadly aim. Aeneas went down to one knee and crouched behind his shield as the spear had sheared the crest from his helmet. He felt a sudden surge of anger at this treacherous attack. He saw Turnus' chariot pulling away, calling to witness Jupiter himself and the altars of the broken treaty, and he has plunged into the general combat.
So the treaty that's been broken here is that it would be a duomachia.
Yes.
Right? It would be a Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton kind of thing.
That's right.
And here you have James Madison taking a pot shot from the periphery.
That sounds like Jimmy.
That's Messapus, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I like Madison, the shortest of the founders.
Is he the shortest of the
Yeah,
founders?
by
Right.
far. I
Really?
think he was under 5 feet tall.
Okay, so he had a bit of a kind of a
I can relate.
Napoleon complex.
Maybe.
Right.
Before Napoleon. There's some anachronistic posturing.
I like it. I missed the last line there that had there. So Aeneas plunged into the general combat and with Mars at his back began to kill. So I indiscriminately, right? And so this is indiscriminately giving his rage free rein. There's the era there.
Yeah.
And so I mark that as the moment. Okay, that's where the flip has taken place.
Yes, I like the Latin here, which you have included in the script. Yeah. Effundit, right? He released omnis habenas, all the reins on his anger.
Right.
So he had been keeping a tight grip, right? Keeping it under wraps, you might say. It was all serenity now. Mm-hmm. Now it's insanity later.
Right. And I suppose you could make the argument is that what really sets him off, it's the fact that the law and order has been broken.
The treaty. You don't make an elaborate treaty.
Right.
And this goes back to your dislike of the rituals, right? Mm-hmm. The religious rituals and so forth by which the treaty is ratified. This is an act of impiety on Messapus' part. He's insulting the gods because these treaties were not hastily made.
Yeah,
it's all done properly.
Right. Let me a slight pushback. It's not that I don't like the rituals. It's just that they're interminable.
It's too much.
It's too much.
Maybe you're not a Roman.
Right. I am not a Roman.
But when you buy a house, right? How much documentation is there? It's like 100 pages. You got to sign things.
Yeah.
I haven't bought one recently, thankfully, but it's always tedious.
It is tedious, but I don't want to read the epic treatment of my mortgage process.
I know, but I'm saying this treaty is like that.
Yes.
They had to, sign everything in quadruplicate, and now Messapus, well, I see a chance to wing Aeneas. I'll just whip the spear at him.
Right.
That's not what you do.
Right. Yeah. And so I think it's that's certainly a big part of it. Maybe that's the main part of it too. But it talks about how the spear clips off the crest of his helmet.
Right.
It reminds me of kind of my days in playing kind of roughhouse, kind of pick up basketball.
Yeah.
And how you could be kind of calm, cool, and collected, but when somebody kind of gives you an elbow,
right,
that you think is a little egregious, for me, that could just
everything goes.
It just goes.
You become the Achilles of the court.
Exactly right.
Wow.
Right. And it didn't make me any better. It actually made me a much worse player.
So you're like a postman, I'm guessing. Like small forward, kind of.
Yeah, I was a small forward. Yeah, I was
Right.
a terrible basketball player. But
Really?
those kinds of things, if I felt like somebody who had like gone out of their way to kind of
elbow to the ribs.
elbow to the ribs or to the face,
Right.
I'd be out with my fifth foul very, very quickly.
Would there be a lot of smack talk?
No, not from me. Not from me. I mean, it wasn't a smack talker, but I tried to let my rage do the talking.
What's the difference between smack talk and trash talk?
I don't think
I've
there's.
never understood that.
I don't think is there a difference? I've
been told there is a difference.
I've heard those used kind of interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But
So this is Messapus kind of giving Aeneas an elbow to the ribs.
I think so. Like,
in the paint.
right, getting the crest of your helmet kind of chopped
Right.
off. That's got to be embarrassing,
Right.
right?
And Aeneas responds with unbridled rage.
Right. So I love that Vergil gives us those two parts. It's the broken treaty.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's been trying to keep law and order up to this point.
Even promising that when I win, I'm not going to dominate all of Turnus's followers.
Exactly.
I'm going to be, a peace-loving, benevolent ruler.
Right. Right. So at this point in the battle, Aeneas and Turnus are both out there, and they're kind of slaughtering everything that comes in their path. They haven't faced each other yet. It's building to that, and that's when Venus, who's like kind of lurking on the edges here, she recognized that in all of this chaos, the city is still peaceful and is left more or less kind of unprotected.
Okay, so how does Venus, Aphrodite, Jeff, in your estimation, how does she in this epic compare to Athena in the Odyssey?
Oh, there's no comparison. And like
In what sense?
Like in terms of like who I prefer as a narrative figure?
Well, yes, and what you think about the characterization, the interest, the sympathy.
I find Venus very unsympathetic.
Okay, in the Aeneid.
In the Aeneid, yes, she's clearly our Venus is to Aeneas as Athena is to Odysseus, right? But Athena, she has this connection with Odysseus in terms of they share a matus.
Right. She says, I love him because, like me, he's clever.
Right.
He can tell good lies, and I admire that.
Right. And I think you could make the argument that, so Athena doesn't have children of her own, but Odysseus is a kind of surrogate son, firstly, because they share these characteristics. Aeneas is literally Venus's son.
And she doesn't love him.
She doesn't love him, right?
No.
It would seem like that kind of relationship would make it a much more deeper connection.
There's no affection.
No, it's very, and she shows up at kind of these odd,
right?
These strange times. She's not hovering around like Athena often does. She doesn't come down.
No compassion, no concern. It seems like Aeneas is simply a vehicle for her grudge against Juno.
That's exactly what I was just going to say, right?
Okay.
And that's an interesting kind of wrinkle to that.
I suppose
Athena doesn't help Odysseus because she's trying to get back at Ares or whatever, right? And so there's a much more kind of personal interest. But yeah, I think like Venus uses her son to give a rude gesture to Juno. That's what seems to be going on here.
Right. So here we sit in the 21st century, never having written an epic to my knowledge, either of us. How could Aeneas have done this better with the character of Venus? What would you have liked to have seen instead? There's nothing better than second guessing the classics.
Yeah, right. I think that I would have preferred, like at least in book 12, that Venus doesn't show up at all.
Oh.
And so
she's so underwhelming, you'd rather not have her on stage.
Right. And I think that would kind of raise kind of interesting theological, teleological questions. But,
so she's like Godfather 3.
Right.
The goddess you wish had never happened.
Exactly. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Right. Have you seen them all?
I believe I have.
Yeah. It's a regrettable addition to the canon. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like Godfather 3, I wish Venus just had never shown up.
Right.
So what do you think?
About Venus?
Or like your question was, what could Vergil have done different, or what would have made it better?
Well, I kind of wonder whether she couldn't have shown some genuine humanity. That's odd to say about a goddess and immortal, but some genuine affection, sympathy, compassion for her son, because he's put up with a lot. But I guess that would make her in some ways a competitor for Dido, because that story has kind of already been told, deep personal affection.
Yeah.
And so much time has been spent establishing Anchises as the sympathetic individual in Aeneas's life.
Right.
And I think, again, that goes to the Roman sense of the paternal bond, right? All throughout Roman literature, the bond between father and son is primary.
Right.
It's not that they didn't love their mothers and wives, but it doesn't get a lot of airtime.
It's true.
It's really subdued. And again, I'm not trying to be so naive as to think there wasn't true affection, within Roman families, but you just didn't talk about it.
Right.
So I think that would be un-Roman if it were stressed too much.
I agree with that. I wonder if even Vergil recognized at some level on the incongruity between Venus's maternal instincts towards Aeneas and the goddess herself being kind of an embodiment of libido.
That's right.
Right, and so it's just that her being a doting mother just doesn't fit with kind of who she is or what
That's
she
an
is,
excellent
right?
point, and I think that gives Vergil a lot of credit for making the tough choices that he had to make in terms of characterization.
Right.
Again, by contrast with Ovid, Venus litters the pages of the Metamorphoses, always acting in an entirely juvenile fashion.
Right, exactly, right.
And so, Virgil's not going to do that.
No. So, I mean, it doesn't ruin the story for me.
No.
But it doesn't seem like at some level Vergil is, what do I do with this?
Right.
And so I think all told, I think he handles it very, very well.
Right.
He's got a much more difficult thing to deal with than Homer with Athena.
Right.
Yeah. So
Venus inspires Aeneas
to say, don't get away from the thick of the battle, and look, the city is ripe for the picking. You want to read a little bit of Lombardo here?
Yeah, I would. She says, I want no delay in carrying out my orders.
Aeneas is speaking here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes.
Yep.
Jupiter is on our side, he says, and I don't want anyone holding back because the decision is sudden. That city, the cause of this war, the heart of Latinus' realm, unless they surrender and submit to our rule, that city I will today overthrow and lay its smoking roofs level with the ground. Am I supposed to wait until Turnus feels like doing battle with me, until he comes back for more, beaten though he is? This is the crux of the accursed war, men. Bring torches and reclaim the treaty with fire.
All right. So storm the battlements.
Yes, and here is a historical connection. You remember, of course, the lovely city of Perugia.
I do.
Right, and you remember that during, the Second Civil War, when there was Antony competing against Octavian, that city chose the wrong side. It went with Antony and the Republican side.
That's right.
And Octavian leveled it. I mean, took every stone off and then reestablished it as Perugia Augusta. Rebuilt the whole thing in his name.
Wow.
So I think there is a definite allusion here to that historical event.
I never read of that connection. That's really interesting. I love that. Yeah.
Right.
So
where do we go next?
Well, now here, this is where Amata finds her end. So we talked
get
about
some
last time.
Greek tragedy in here.
We do, right? So what did you think of Amata's suicide? Was it just kind of layering it on for the sake of layering it on, or did you find this moving and tragic?
I don't find her sympathetic for whatever reason. I don't really understand her motivations. This could very well be a failure on my part as a reader, right? It's not fair to blame the author for the reader's failure to appreciate certain characterizations.
Good point, yeah.
I don't know, but I have never been particularly moved by Amata. Now, she has her doppelganger in Dido, right? She's the balance to Dido.
Right.
But it's just not compelling.
So you do see some of that parallelism.
Absolutely.
That we'll be talking about a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I thought it happens very, very quickly.
Right.
And we talked last time about, Amata has this connection to this love of Turnus, which is kind of puzzling to some degree.
It's very strong.
Right. But so she sees the city being kind of overrun, and because the city's being overrun, she assumes that Turnus has failed, he's dead.
Right.
And so she fashions a noose and she hangs herself. So yeah, it kind of, her death kind of reminded me of Eurydice's death in Antigone. So Creon's wife, who's basically kind of a non
the mother of Haman, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And so she also commits suicide.
Right.
But it seems like just kind of like an add-on.
She does it out of grief for the death of her son, isn't it? Because he kills himself when Antigone kills herself.
Right. Exactly. But it has always struck me as like Sophocles says, well, we just need another body here.
Right.
It just seemed like her character is never really developed in that play. And you never kind of get a connection with her. In the same way that I think we don't really get a connection with Amata.
Yeah. But here's something from the annals of limited understanding on the part of the reader. Mm-hmm. When I was in 8th grade, was the first time that I encountered Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And I watched a play, I think it was at Michigan State University, of Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
It's the first I had encountered Shakespeare, 8th grade. And I came away thinking, well, that was pretty poor. Everyone dies at the end. So that's a clear indication of my failure to understand really much at all about the depth of human emotion and love and romance and tragedy and sorrow. But then again, I was in 8th grade.
Right.
But it just shows that the reader the viewer has a responsibility as well.
Yes.
So I wonder if something similar may be going on here.
Okay. All right. I will follow you in
Do you remember when you
charitable approach? Yes.
when you first encountered Shakespeare?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we didn't see it. We read. I remember reading Romeo and Juliet.
Okay.
And being very
in a high school literature
high school,
class.
I think it was 8th or 9th grade. Like
Right.
and being very underwhelmed by it.
Right.
But then in high school, we took a class trip to Stratford, Ontario, where they have the famous Shakespeare
Right.
Festival, and we saw a production of Taming of the Shrew.
Yeah.
That was done in like America in the 1950s.
And you were blown away.
I was blown away.
Right.
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
And then since then, I've seen productions of Macbeth in kind of the classic style.
Right.
Which is my favorite Shakespeare play. And
It's a very short one, if I'm not mistaken.
It's short. It is just brilliant front to back. But I've never loved Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
And even as you were talking, I thought
Maybe that wasn't the best one for me to first encounter, but
he's Romeo and Juliet is modeled on kind of these cheeseball ancient Greek romances.
yes,
where
and Pyramus and Thisbe and Ovid,
right, and where the girl and the guy they mistake the other one for being dead, and they can't
Right.
help themselves and kind of follow them in death, and the other one wakes up. Right.
Yeah, but the brilliance of the language was lost on me.
Yeah.
As well as any kind of compassion for the individuals involved in the story.
Right.
I was in 8th grade.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think with Shakespeare, for an 8th grader, the language is a huge barrier.
Well, it takes, and I'm not casting aspersions on any of my teachers at the time, because I don't think I could teach Shakespeare to 8th graders, but it takes a particularly gifted teacher to convey that kind of information to someone at that age.
Right.
It's a high bar.
Yeah.
Just another tiny digression since we're on Shakespeare.
Yeah.
The last few weeks we were talking about Jack Holtzmark, right?
Yes.
And Tarzan and tradition.
Indeed.
Holtzmark made a comment that I have never forgotten. And he said that no author has had more impact on a culture than Homer on the Greeks, with the possible exception of Shakespeare in English.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very insightful. I've thought about that a lot.
Yeah. No, I think that's right on.
Right.
I think that's right on. Yeah. I remember I had an English teacher in high school when we read Macbeth, and then we were gonna watch a videotape production of it, and he said, with the language, he says, don't get hung up on, wait, what did he just say? What on earth could that mean? I remember he said, just let it wash over you.
Right.
Let it wash over you. And so in a good production, a good acted production of Shakespeare, the visuals will fill in the gaps.
Right.
Right. Not always, but I thought, you just kind of let the language, and you say, I have no idea what Macbeth just said, but it was powerful and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to understand every little detail without
That's good advice.
to appreciate the beauty of it. Yeah.
That's good advice, especially for someone who's young.
Right.
So where are we headed next, Jeff, as we get back on topic here?
All right, so Amata is dead, and Turnus now he finally recognizes, oh my goodness, the city is being sacked and looted. Juturna, his sister, who's been down there disguised and has been trying to kind of protect him. It's Juno, remember, that comes to Juturna and says, "Hey, do as much as you can to
cause some havoc, delay the inevitable."
Right, and so Turnus wants to go to the city, and Juturna tries to keep him in the battle. She recognizes, every step he takes towards the city is a step towards all of this ending.
And then Turnus has this monologue, right?
Yes, right. And so he
can you read some of that for us from Lombardo?
Yes. And so he says to Juturna, says, "Now, sister, the fates triumph at last. Stop holding me back. We will follow where God is and cruel fortune call us. My mind is made up. I will meet Aeneas and bear death's bitterness. No longer, sister, will you see me shamed, but first allow me to rage with furious rage." So he recognizes that, okay, he knows that his death is coming, but he's also going to
go out like a man.
He's going to amp up his body count.
Yeah,
on the way there.
Go down punching.
Exactly.
Right. So if I can continue there.
Yeah.
The spear Aeneas had thrown, because Aeneas tries to whips a spear at Turnus, but it lodges in a tree trunk.
Yes.
It misses him, right?
Yep.
The arrow that gets him slows him down, but to quote Lombardo, the spear Aeneas had thrown was stuck in the tough roots of this tree, and the Trojan now stooped to pull it out so he could take down with this weapon the man he could not catch on foot. Turnus, out of his mind with fear, cried out, "Have pity on me, Faunus and Mother Earth. Hold fast the spear, if ever I have honored you, whom the men of Aeneas now profane in war." He spoke, and the gods heard his prayer. Aeneas struggled long with the pliant root, but could not with all his strength force open its stubborn grip. And while he struggled, Juturna, transformed again into Mentiscus, ran up and handed her brother his sword. Venus, outraged at the nymph's audacity, came and plucked the spear out from the root.
All right, now this is really interesting. This is one place where I like that Vergil brought Venus into the mix.
Okay.
Because speaking of parallelisms...
Oh, no, come on, Jeff. Make up your mind. You want Venus on the scene? You don't want Venus on the scene?
I want her there on my terms.
Okay.
Right?
I don't think she's gonna go for that. You know, she rides in a chariot pulled by doves.
It's true. That's just true. You're right. Exactly. So,
but anyway,
all that
point.
aside, right? So, speaking of parallelisms,
right?
This, if Book 12 has resonance with Book 6 or vice versa, this struck me as Aeneas plucking the golden bough.
That's right.
So way back when we were talking about Book 6,
plucking the golden bough as his totem to get into the underworld.
Right, and that very interesting word, the cum tandem there. So
that's right.
Remember, Aeneas is told that
sluggish, reluctant.
So he says if you're fated to do this,
right,
the bow will basically drop into your hands.
That's correct.
But when he actually gets it,
right,
it resists.
Right.
And he has to pluck it here.
It's like getting the paper wrapper off your straw.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about frustration. Exactly. Has that happened to you before?
It has. And then
you order a extra big gulp and you just want to get the straw in there and get down to the thirst quenching.
And you don't want to wait.
No, but you can't get that thing out of the paper sleeve.
It's terrible, right?
I think it's put there for our own sanitary protection.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to risk it.
Yeah,
I don't want to wait another 5 seconds.
The only thing that is in favor of the paper sleeve is like when you do get the top off, easily, then you can blow on the straw and shoot.
That's fun.
That's fun.
But they began weakening the end of those things just to frustrate children.
They did?
You didn't know that?
No.
The end of the paper
kids?
sleeve is weaker so that when you blow on it, it has no devastating impact on your comrades.
Oh, my goodness.
Right.
Oh, that makes me very upset.
So that's the cunc tandem here, right?
Yes.
The bow came slowly.
Right.
But here what? It comes out.
It comes out, well, again, it seems like he's wrestling with the spear that's stuck in the tree, right? So it kind of reminds me of the bow there. But it also kind of remind me of, the glass slipper, it's Excalibur. Whoever can pull the sword from the stone will
become... The glass slipper is Cinderella.
Cinderella, right?
Okay.
Whoever's foot, fits it is the princess.
Right.
If whoever draws the sword will become king of England here.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Exactly. Right. And so Aeneas kind of pulling the spear out, it seems to be kind of one of those moments.
Huh.
And Venus has to come down and pluck it out for him.
Here, let me do that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Venus says, hold my beer.
He's trying to open the pickle jar.
Right.
And he can't do it. And so it's one of these moments where I think it like the golden bough.
Yeah.
It kind of, Aeneas is chosen, he's fated, but there's also some questions about it.
Yeah. Speaking of opening pickle jars, it's time for the ads.
Let's do it.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing has been bringing high-quality translations of the classics as well as all other kinds of literature to a mass audience for 52 years. Am I mistaken?
No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yep.
Jeff, what do you like about Hackett? And you must answer this without mentioning the glorious covers.
Well, I love the covers.
Wait a minute!
No, I love the affordability. I love the accuracy of the translations. The Lombardo translation of the Aeneid has been fabulous. I'm going to seriously miss that when we move on.
Right.
I've used Lombardo's translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey, all kinds of different. I love the translation of the Bacchae.
We know you keep an emergency copy of the Ovid's Metamorphoses in your glove box.
In my glove box, you never know when you're going to need it. Right.
Right. You end up in a snow bank. You want to go out reading Ovid.
Yep. So I found it's great for students. It's great just to have on your shelf. The translations from Hackett always kind of thread that needle between being true to the original language, but also readable for the modern audience.
Yes, approachable. Yep. And you've told some interesting stories lately about how much your students appreciate the affordability.
Yes. Oh,
they're not going to be crushed beneath the cost of these books.
Right. I teach community college students, and a lot of them are coming to college with not a lot of money jangling in their pocket, and so they really appreciate that. And Hackett fits that bill.
That's excellent. So, what if our listeners would like to do two things?
Yep.
They'd like to score some great copies of the classics in both paperback and hardcover, and they would like to support this humble podcast.
Yes.
What ought they do?
They should go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT, publishing.com, find those texts that you want, drop them in the basket, and then type in this coupon code is AN2023. So AN ad nauseum plus the current year.
Yes, and I'm no prophet, but I think that along about January 1, it'll probably change to AN2024.
Possibly.
Is there a chance?
We'll see there.
Okay.
Right? And if you do that, dear listener, you will get two amazing things. You'll get 20% off your entire order and
free shipping.
Check it out. This episode of Ad Nauseam also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. Dave, I had a cup of Ratio Coffee from a Ratio 8 this morning.
I did too.
And how was it?
From mine, not from yours.
That's right, yeah.
You didn't see me sneak into your kitchen.
I hate it when you do
pour a
that.
Cup.
Right? My cup was wonderful. How about yours?
It was excellent.
Yes.
I decided to make the roast a little bit stronger today.
Did?
Yeah, so I used my Baratza burr grinder,
Nice.
which I also picked up from Ratio.
Yes.
And ground some delicious beans, set it on 21, and a stronger roast. It was very fortifying.
Excellent.
Skip breakfast, just drink a couple cups of coffee.
Without a doubt, right?
Right.
So, yes, so listeners, do yourself a favor. Check out ratiocoffee.com and look at one of these wonderful machines, or both, the Ratio 6 and its older brother, the Ratio 8.
You're a veteran of both.
I am a veteran of both, and they're both wonderful, reliable,
Right.
heirloom-type machines.
Yeah, speaking of heirloom,
Yes?
some listeners might say, come on, guys, I like the podcast to some extent. I love coffee, but there's no way I can pay that much for a coffee machine. Are you crazy?
Right.
What would you say to them?
I would say that it's an investment. Like
Right.
if you love coffee and you're serious about your coffee, this is a machine that is going to last you a very, very long time.
That's right.
It's not going to give out like one of these dime store off the shelf brands.
Right. It's going to last decades.
It's going to last decades. It's gonna give you a perfect cup of coffee every time. And it's one of these places where I think where you get what you pay for.
Yeah, I have to say that in the time that I have owned the Ratio 8, I have owned 2 lawnmowers.
Is that right?
Yes. My lawnmower fails more readily than this coffee machine.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
I have to tell you, I do not use my lawnmower every day.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I know it's maybe a more complicated machine, but it just shows that the Ratio 8 is built really, really well.
I think that illustrates that very well. So do yourself a favor, go to ratiocoffee.com, find the machine that you want. And what's our coupon code now for
The
this?
coupon code for the month of May is ANCO3 and then F for flavor.
Flavor. Gotcha.
Or flantabulous.
Nice. Yes. ANCO3F. And what will that get them?
15% off.
Do not delay.
All right, Jeff,
Yes.
as we get back into it, the camera, as you like to say, the camera has to now zoom up, pan out, and zoom up to Olympus.
Yes.
And we're going to get the divine perspective on the events on the field.
Yes. I like this. I like this scene a lot. I didn't like it at first, but once I
Okay.
thought about it, I know that, Vergil's, he's wrapping things up.
Right.
And he has to have a scene where Juno finally says, fine.
Yeah, the rapprochement.
Right. And so she has to kind of give in. She has to bend the knee. And so she finally recognizes, Jupiter says, are you finally ready to step aside? And she agrees, and she abandons Turnus in a way that also kind of strikes me as very Homeric of Hector. When he's down there fighting Achilles, and
Right.
he's abandoned by the gods, and he's left.
Apollo, right?
Apollo. Yep.
Deceived and abandoned.
Right. And so we get a very similar kind of scene, and I the language just kind of emphasizes how alone and vulnerable Turnus is, and he's hurtling towards his fate.
So the duel is finally on. Turnus and Aeneas trade stones and spear throws.
Yep.
And at last, Aeneas throws a spear which rips through Turnus's shield and into his thigh.
Right.
No more squats for him.
Yep.
He sinks to the ground, pleads for the return of his body and an end to the rage, and he says...
Before I do this, so Turnus here is very clearly our Hector, right?
Okay.
So remember, in the Iliad, Hector I think he's wounded in the neck, but Homer says his voice box was still there that he could speak.
Yes, this is Eric Bana,
Eric Bana, right?
the Australian actor.
Yeah.
With a callback to our early and mostly unsuccessful episode known as...
More bods than gods.
That's correct.
Right?
Our review of the movie Troy. It was something like the 5th or 6th episode. Right after History in the Trojan War, which was a successful one, and Schliemann with exclamation points, which people also liked.
Yeah.
But our takedown of that movie?
Yeah.
No.
I think that's just all the more reason they should go back and
You
judge,
think
judge
so?
for themselves.
Okay.
Because I was a fan of that.
You liked that one.
I did.
It included some audio clips
Yeah, exactly
from
right.
the movie.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
What does Turnus say at this point?
So Turnus says, like Hector does, he's kind of he kind of begs for a not a truce, but he recognizes, okay, you've won.
Right.
Let's not make this worse than it has to be.
Right. Leave me with some shreds of dignity.
Right. So he says, go ahead. He's speaking to Aeneas, of course. Use your chance. I deserve it. I will not ask anything for myself. But if a parent's grief can still touch you, remember your own father, Anchises, and take pity on Daunus' old age. I beg you, Give me, or if you prefer, give my dead body back to my people. So even in there, Turnus is suggesting, I mean, he's not wounded in the throat, he's wounded in the thigh.
Right.
He's saying, if you want, you could let me live.
You could spare my life.
Right. But he recognizes that's not really in the cards. He says, you've beaten me, and the Ausonians have seen me beaten. Stretch out my hand to you. Lavinia is yours. Let your hatred stop here. And then this is where, because we're getting very close to the last line. Shall I keep going here?
Oh, yes, I think so.
All right,
We want to know what happens.
So Aeneas stood there, lethal in his bronze. His eyes searched the distance, and his hand paused on the hilt of his sword. Now, again, in terms of, can you see how this...
cinematic?
Yes, just kind of there's no soundtrack. The wind is kind of whistling.
Right.
And there's just this really pregnant pause.
Soundtrack, you mean there's no music?
There's no music, right? It's just the natural sounds.
But then I would say that probably the wind dies down and the birds stop chirping.
Right. Kind of gets to a dead calm.
And who's that rabbit in Bambi? Come on. How's your Disney Alia?
I don't know.
I think it's Thumper.
Is it Thumper?
Isn't that the name of the rabbit?
Yes. Is he's in this?
Maybe. Okay. But on the edge of the meadow, he leans forward with his big rabbity eyes to see what's going to happen.
There we go.
It's that pregnant moment.
Right. And so he's got his hand on the sword, and so Aeneas is at this point. Okay, which Aeneas are we going to get? Are we going to get civilized Aeneas, or are we going to get ragey Aeneas? Says Turnus's words were winning him over. Okay, the needle is going towards civilized. But then his gaze shifted to the faithful baldric, the male pattern baldric.
Yes.
On his enemy's shoulder. And the belt glittered with its familiar metalwork, the belt of young Pallas, whom Turnus had killed and whose insignia he now wore as a trophy.
Yes, and remember, all the way back to Book 6, when he is in the underworld, and Anchises is telling him, here are all the famous Romans, but here, Aeneas, is your task. The Greeks are going to be better at the arts, but your job is to spare the downcast, right? Mm-hmm. And crush what is it? Something about, I'm not going to be able to, debellare, there you go, debellare superbos. Mm-hmm. But grind to a pulp the haughty,
yes.
Right? Parcere subiectis et debellare superbos.
Right.
So which is Turnus? Is Turnus the downtrodden that Aeneas is supposed to spare?
Yeah.
Or is he the haughty and arrogant whom Aeneas is supposed to grind into oblivion?
Right. And I think it's on that really interesting knife edge, right? Turnus, as we've seen him in the battle, clearly he's superbus, right? But in this moment, he's kind of begging for some kind of clementia.
Is it authentic though?
Right. Yeah. Is it just kind of opportunistic? Given
correct. He's never begged before, but now when he's under Aeneas' heel, now suddenly he's humble.
Good point. Right. And so it goes on. So he sees the baldric of Pallas, right? So remember, as the young son of Evander, right? And so Aeneas' eyes drank in this memorial of his own savage grief, and then burning with fury and terrible in his wrath, he said, "Do you think you can get away from me while wearing the spoils of one of my own men? Pallas sacrifices you with this stroke. Pallas, and makes you pay with your guilty blood." Saying this and seething with rage, Aeneas buried his sword in Turnus' chest. The man's limbs went limp and cold, and with a moan, his soul fled resentfully down to the shades.
Nice. Can I read the Latin there?
Please.
For these last few lines?
Yep.
You want me to read, what is it? We got 8 here.
Yep.
Is that too many?
Might pick it up where you want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll pick it up with I guess I'll read them all because we want that addressed to Pallas.
Yes.
Il oculis postquam saevi monumenta dolores, exuias quae sit furdris accensus et ira, terribilis tu ninx bulliis induta meorum, erribiata mihi pallas te hoc vulnera pallas, immoladet poenam scelerat tex sanguina sumit, hoc dicanes ferrad verso sub pectora condit, furvidus astilis al vuntur frigora membra, vita quacum gemetu fugit indignata sub umbras.
The end.
That's it.
That's it.
Flees away. His soul fled resentfully. That's indignata. Down to the shades. And the story ends.
Yep. Yeah.
We're here. So what do you think?
What
Someone's
to make of this?
reading it for the first time. Augustus, right? He says in 19 BC, after the death of Vergil, he tells Maecenas, probably Maecenas brought him the news. Hey, Augustus, Octavian, guess what? Vergil's dead. And he left these instructions in his will: burn the Aeneid.
Yeah.
Right. Throw it into the incinerator in the backyard or something like that.
Right. Yep.
What should I do? And Augustus says, nah, it's good enough for me.
Let's publish it.
Right. Send it to Amazon and we'll self-publish it.
Exactly.
Right. Get it out there. Let's see how it does. Pay for some reviews in order to boost sales.
Right.
And then he reads it. He's heard snippets of it before. We know that snippets of it were read to him by Vergil during the course of its composition. But now he gets to the last line. Right. His soul fled resentfully to the shades. What's Augustus make of it?
Right. It's such a haunting question, right? So it comes down to if we could see the whole book is kind of a choice between civilization and savagery, right?
Spare the downtrodden, crush the arrogant.
And he chooses savagery, and that's what it ends with. What on earth does that mean?
Right.
And why would Augustus be okay with this? Then also that question that okay, we do know that the Aeneid is unfinished. There are some lines that don't scan.
Yes.
There's a few characters that die and then come back to life.
Yes.
Right? And so the idea is that, okay, if Vergil had gone back, he would have kept that guy
just
dead.
Smoothed those things
Right.
out.
Might have added Thumper.
Although, maybe, or Flower, the skunk,
yes,
maybe it is a deliberate imitation of Homer,
right,
who had some incongruities in this massive epic.
I would buy that as well. Right? I certainly don't buy the arguments that he would have added a whole other epilogue to this, right? And they lived happily ever after, right?
Yeah.
No, I love the way it ends.
Right.
Yeah.
So are we ready now to get into the actual interpretations?
Yeah, let's do it.
Which we have been teasing the audience.
Yeah, let's talk about
for 30-some episodes.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so I have arranged a number of these. This is what I use in my typical mythology classes, what I also use when I teach classical lit. And we start with a famous classicist, C.M. Bowra, his 1945 article, From Vergil to Milton. So, Jeff, could you read this one, and then we'll talk about it?
Right. So, Bowra writes, Vergil revealed an entirely new use for epic to an age for which the old heroic outlook was too anarchic and antisocial. Above all, he made it contain almost a philosophy of life and death, a view of the universe which answered many desires in the heart of man and provided an impressive background to the new ideal. Vergil's epic is still epic because it treats of what is greatest and noblest in man.
I like it.
Yeah.
Some flowery prose.
I don't think it really kind of answers the question.
It doesn't. And when I teach this, I like to point out the year in which it was written. And I don't want to be uncharitable to anyone, but we are all, right, children of our own time. This was written in 1945 after the end of 6 years of universal war. Right. Yep. The Allies and the Axis powers had fought on every continent except Antarctica, if I'm not mistaken, for 6 years. And now what do we get? Well, we get an interpretation of the end of the Aeneid, which talks about what is greatest and noblest in man, a philosophy of life and death. Now, that may in fact be true, and it could just be a coincidence that Bowra wrote this at the end of World War II, but I think it sets up a nice contrast for some of the interpretations that are coming later, which seem even more closely tied to their historical moment.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's go on then. Let's see how this compares. So next up, we have C.J. Ellingham's interpretation from his article, Vergil's Pilgrim's Progress from Greece and Rome in 1947. So not that long after Bowra's take.
That's right. Just a couple years later.
Why don't you read this for us?
Yeah, so he says, the theme of the Aeneid is not so much Romanam Condere Gentem, founding the Roman race, as the deliverance of the world from war, which Vergil believed had been accomplished by Rome and the Augustan settlement. Turnus must die because he stands for war. And with the death of Turnus, the poem ends. Man has finished with war. This again strikes me as a very close to the end of World War II
right.
kind of interpretation.
Yes.
And I think it's important to remember that if you had looked around for a civilized nation, what is the most civilized nation in the 1930s in terms of art and science and technology and music? It's Germany.
Yeah.
Right? Their level of development and sophistication, all of the philology that we study and read was developed in Germany.
Very true.
And yet it turns out that all of that was no barrier to being just totally barbaric and cruel. So Elllingham, right, when he writes this, I think it's a little bit of optimism about what World War II has actually accomplished.
It was the second war to end all wars,
right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unlike a League of Nations, then there'll be the United Nations.
Right.
Man has finished with war.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to, be unfair to Elllingham. He's probably wise enough to realize there'll be more wars, but I don't think he should be unfair to Vergil either. I don't think Vergil is naive enough to believe that there could ever be an end to war as long as human beings are involved.
Yes. Yeah.
So with the death of Turnus, the poem ends, man has finished with war. I'm not totally persuaded by that.
He clearly sees in that's its main point was to praise Augustus, and at the very least, his bringing to the end the civil wars.
Correct.
At that time.
Right. So both of these interpretations from the 1940s, they stand in line more or less with the ancient description of why Vergil wrote the poem.
Yes. Yep.
But let's go on to 1953.
Okay.
And this is from TAPA, right?
Yep.
The Journal of the American Philological Association, written by R.A. Brooks, and the name of the article is Discolor Aura. And Jeff, could you read that one, please?
Yes. Brooks writes, Vergil seeks justification for Aeneas not only by time, but in experience, as the individual who is driven by forces and looks for a personal fulfillment outside and beyond himself. The justification is never found. That failure is the central thread of the Aeneid.
Right.
No, I like that. I like that. I mean, I don't think it's the whole story, but I think that's often an overlooked element.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Brooks is representative of his decade or of his time. I mean, it's only been 6 years since Ellingham's interpretation. But this is very different than the previous two.
Radically different.
Radically so.
Yep.
There is no justification, he says, that justification for a personal fulfillment outside and beyond Aeneas, that's never found, and that failure is the central thread.
Right. So I think.
So why do you find that persuasive?
Oh, I find it. I mean, the way I see it is, it's going to sound like a cop out, but
okay.
I mean, I think that the end of the Aeneid speaks to me is that yes, this is about in Ellingham's phrase. Yeah, maybe the end of the civil wars and maybe the promise of a golden age to come. But Vergil's always whispering to us or shouting at us is, look at the tremendous cost that this comes with, right?
Okay.
And Aeneas, the Dido episode, I think is the classic example of this, is that
right.
he always has to set aside what he really wants and what he desires in service of this fate that's ultimately kind of pulling him away. It reminded me, as I was reading today, it reminded me of, it's almost like Moses. Moses isn't allowed to kind of enter the promised land. He's given a glimpse, but he never kind of gets the glory, so to speak,
That's true.
of leading the people
That's
there.
right.
And so Aeneas is kind of leading to the towards what will become Rome, but he can never really kind of taste it himself.
Yeah.
And so I think it's equal parts of those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on then to the next one.
Yep. This is from C.S. Lewis in the year after Brooks, in his preface to Paradise Lost, 1954.
Right.
So read this.
Yeah, so he says, quote, Virgil's achievement was to take one single national legend and treat it in such a way that we feel the vaster theme to be somehow implicit in it. He has to deal with a limited number of personages and make us feel as if national or almost cosmic issues are involved. The whole Aeneid is the story of a transition in the world order. This theme of the great transition is closely connected with the Vergilian sense of vocation. In making his one legend symbolical of the destiny of Rome, he has willy-nilly symbolized the destiny of man. The explicitly religious subject for any future epic has been dictated by Vergil. It is the only further development left.
All right. So Lewis, as you might expect, sees a bit of almost like we get that kind of pre-Christian Vergil. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
but I mean, you have to remember, he is writing the preface to Milton's Paradise Lost.
Of course, right. So he's writing this for a particular purpose, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think if we can draw out Lewis's ideas a little bit, I think what he's saying is the Homeric epic is not about national destiny. It's about Achilles. It's about nature versus nurture. And the Odyssey is about one man's journey toward personal fulfillment, right?
Yes.
But the Aeneid is different. Aeneas represents a whole nation. And so I think what he's saying is once Vergil has done that so successfully, the only kind of innovation in epic that remains is a religious epic.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is what Milton does.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons why I can't accept this is that we have Ovid once again. What's Ovid supposed to do in Vergil's shadow? How am I supposed to write, an epic now?
Right.
Well, he doesn't even attempt to deal with any of those other themes.
Right.
He makes the whole thing a joke.
Right. Exactly.
I can't talk about an individual. I can't talk about national destiny. I'm just going to tell a bunch of funny stories in brilliant, brilliant poetry.
Yes, exactly.
That's persuasive to me.
Yeah. No, that I agree. All right, so who's next?
Well, now we have to turn the corner. So
Okay.
now we're going into the 1960s, and now I think you're going to hear a very, very different theme. And this comes from A. Parry, The Two Voices of Vergil's Aeneid. This is from Arrian, 1963.
All right, so Parry writes, we hear two distinct voices in the Aeneid, a public voice of triumph and a private voice of regret. The private voice, the personal emotions of a man, is never allowed to motivate action, but is nonetheless everywhere present. Sunt lacrimae rerum et mentem mortalia tangunt. The pleasure felt here by Aeneas in the midst of his reawakened grief is the essential paradox and the great human insight of the Aeneid, a poem as much about the imperium of art as about the imperium of Rome. So that I'm with Parry.
So you're liking every one of the revisionist interpretations.
I don't think this is revisionist.
Absolutely.
No, not at all.
Private voice, personal voice, a private voice of regret, a public voice of triumph.
How can you deny that that's in the epic?
Well, because I don't think that that's a Roman way of reading the epic.
I think maybe the Romans were wrong.
Okay.
I think maybe
that's going to make the highlight reel.
All right. I think certainly the Romans would have highlighted, of course, kind of the Augustan connection, but I don't know how anyone could hear or read that poem and not understand kind of the pull in the other direction. It seems to me so much, especially the way the epic ends.
Yeah,
I don't know how you could say, oh well, this is just it's Augustan praise.
Well, this part I like about Parry's interpretation. Aeneas in the midst of his reawakened grief. Right. So the Latin line you quoted is from Book 1 when he's looking at the architecture of Carthage,
right,
and he sees the scenes of himself, right? Mm-hmm. So he feels a kind of aesthetic pleasure when he sees the portrayal of Troy, but it's in the middle of his reawakened grief. Mm-hmm. So Parry says this is the essential paradox and the great human insight of the Aeneid, right? That pleasure and grief can exist in an aesthetic sense. Yes. I think he's right about that.
Yes.
I don't think it's primarily the theme of the epic.
I wouldn't say it's primarily the theme of the epic, but I think it is a counterbalance to what I take to be just kind of a too easy of interpretation.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So what do we got next?
All right. Next up, we have M.C.J. Putnam from his book Poetry of the Aeneid from 1965. So we're still in the 60s. And
middle of the 60s.
What does Putnam have to say?
Okay. He says, Turnus stands for the world of Italy, that strange combination of wilderness and pastoral order. In spite of Juno's plea to Jupiter, it is this world which Aeneas destroys. The progress of empire, as Vergil puts it before the reader, is attributed only to madness, vengeance, and death.
Okay, now I think that's a bit revisionist.
I would say so.
Right.
And I've included a little bit of information here. Now, I might be unfair here.
Okay.
I have been known to be unfair.
What do you got?
Well, in 1962, right, Rachel Carson, the American biologist, came out with a very popular book called Silent Spring, right?
Yep.
Which was an environmental work on pollution and the natural history of the sea, right? And so it was her work that led to tighter control of pesticides, including DDT,
yes,
and was the birth of the environmental movement.
Yes, indeed.
So my thesis, perhaps unfair, is that Putnam, right, who writes his comments in 1965, is living within that world and thinking those kinds of things. So that the fact that he would say that Aeneas destroys the combination of wilderness and pastoral order, an environmental interpretation of the Aeneid, it's a little bit too much tied to the era in which it emerged.
I would agree.
For me to find plausible.
I agree. And I think even to broaden that out, I think that, he's writing what? It says 1965. So we're starting to see kind of the beginnings of kind of post-colonial studies, right?
That's correct.
We're kind of after World War I, World War II, kind of the full breakup of what was the British Empire. Right. And now it's kind of questions about American imperialism.
Right. So you've got the Soviets and you've got the Americans. And
Vietnam is starting to rage. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So it seems maybe a little too much of an anachronistic read,
right,
of what Vergil intended, or what the Romans would have understood.
I
the Romans
agree.
Who are wrong, as we know, but what they would have understood when they read it.
Yes.
Okay, so the last one we have here is from Steel Commager.
I wish my parents had named me Steel. What a name!
Yeah, it's better than Copper, probably.
Yes. Right.
A collection of essays, 1966.
Right, so Commager writes, in the myth of a faulted past, destruction, and rebirth under a semi-divine leader, Vergil's generation could find a parable for its own experience and for its hopes as well.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right on. I mean, there's not a lot here to work with, but that's kind of a broad summary of kind of that encapsulates a lot of different interpretations. I think that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who wrote? Is it The Who talking about my generation?
Yeah.
Is that The Who? Mm-hmm. When did that come out?
64.
Okay.
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
So Vergil's writing for his generation, right? a faulted past, destruction, rebirth under a semi-divine leader.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the way that the Romans of Vergil's time saw Roman history?
As
Maybe the last couple generations of the terrible civil wars.
I would buy that. Yeah. You find it kind of a little too un-Romany?
A little too on the nose.
Okay. All right. Okay.
He didn't. Are we to think that Vergil wrote only for his immediate predecessors? Did I say predecessors? Excuse me, successors. I think he believed and intended to write something for the ages.
I think so too.
To rival Homer.
Right.
So I think any interpretation that too neatly fits his own time is too neat.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, that kind of wraps up some of the interpretations. By the way, if any of you are Latin or myth teachers out there and you would find this material that we have just shared helpful, this collection of quotes, I know it only goes up through 1966 and interpretation has proceeded since then. I don't know if it's improved, but if you would like this, I'll be happy to share it with you. Contact Jeff or me and I'll send you this document if you would find it helpful in your own teaching.
Sounds good.
So we have a little bit more. Vergil's Nachleben.
Yeah.
Right? Conte provides us here, Jean Biagio Conte, Latin literature and interpretation, some help. He says that Vergil's Nachleben, his afterlife, is Western literature itself.
All of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, that's high.
That's
high
bold.
praise. Yeah, it is.
But I would say it's indisputable. If one has not read and understood, I'm going to make an absolutist claim, read and understood the Aeneid, it's difficult to interact or impossible to interact responsibly with any aspect of Western literature.
Right. In the same way, even dialing back, I think that to fully understand the Aeneid, you have to go back to Homer, right?
Correct.
So, Homer is the first pillar, and maybe Vergil is the second.
It's an infinite regress.
On which all of Western literature stands.
That's right. So Conte tells us that Vergil was a school author by 25 BC.
When does he die?
He dies in 19.
Okay.
Yep, and he is buried in Naples.
Okay.
He died in Brundisium. He was about to sail for Greece, and he was brought back to Naples. But he had published the Eclogues in 39. He had published the Georgics in 29. And even before the Aeneid was published, he was being used as a text in the schools.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so nothing that I have been written is used as a text in schools.
No, I don't believe that.
Yeah. Nor that I ever will write. And I'm just saying this is a tremendously significant accomplishment, unparalleled. Right. And you want to read that Conte quote there from line 285?
Yeah, so he says his works are quoted so often in antiquity that even if they had been lost, they could still be reconstructed in large measure.
Right.
I mean, that's hyperbole there, or
no, it's true.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and Conte also mentions, and we talked about this a little bit when Dirges for Dead Dido, I think, was the episode where Augustine is talking about his interaction with the Aeneid.
Right.
Unparalleled influence in Christian antiquity. Conte says that St. Jerome had most of the Aeneid memorized.
Wow.
Which is phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. And Vergil survives really unlike any other author as we get into kind of the Christian era as one of these kind of sainted pagans.
That's right.
And so he survives very well. We haven't done an episode on Eclogue 4, have we?
Not devoted to Eclogue 4. We've mentioned it here and there.
But the
so-called messianic Eclogue.
Right, where it has been read that Vergil's kind of predicting the birth of
yes, I think we should do an episode on it because I've studied it somewhat, and it is fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Of course, we both know that in the Sistine Chapel, the Cumaean Sibyl is painted up there on the wall right next to the prophet Isaiah and the other prophets, Jeremiah.
And she is ripped.
Her
biceps, it's intimidating.
That's right. Because she's predicting, the Cumaean Sibyl is predicting the birth of Christ, according to medieval understanding.
Exactly.
According to medieval legend, the Apostle Paul, when he landed at Naples, remember he's sailing there, he landed and he took the Via Appia north toward Rome, went through Formiae, where we've both been.
That's right.
It tells us that Paul went to the tomb of Vergil and wept because Paul had been born too late to convert Vergil to the Christian faith. Now, almost certainly a ridiculous and made-up story.
But
it captures, I think, brilliantly just how influential Vergil was on Christian thinkers throughout the history of the Christian faith.
Right. I think unlike any other
absolutely
pre-Christian or Greco-Roman author.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no Dante, obviously, without Vergil.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
What about your experience with the Aeneid, Jeff? What was your first encounter? Do you remember what it was like? When was it, and how did you respond?
I remember first reading a translation of the Aeneid in college as an undergrad. Did not encounter it. I don't know if I even knew it existed before I came to college. And so I read it in translation in a classical literature and translation class. And I remember loving it.
Right.
I remember loving it. I remember being kind of puzzled by kind of the initial blandness of Aeneas' character, as we've talked about in this. But
that's never gone away, has it?
It has not gone away. But it was always, the ending of the epic, which we've just been talking about, that has always haunted me and will continue to haunt me.
Yeah.
I find it so interesting in the number of ways directions it pulls you. Yeah. How about you?
Yes, for me, it was as an undergrad, too, at Calvin College at the time, now university, where we were both students, that institution which shall be named. And it was in a Latin 2 class, Latin 3 class, taught by Ken Bratt. I was using the Clyde Farr version with the purple cover.
Oh, yeah.
Many people know that, I'm sure. I had a hardcover.
Still got mine.
Yep. Books 1 through 6 were included in there. And, we started reading Armo Rum Quequeno and so forth. And I thought, wow, this is really incredible. Where's this been all my life, right? This is shocking. I was only 19 or 20 at the time, so I didn't have a lot of life, but I was just astounded. And I was never able to take a Vergil course in grad school, but I made it a goal to finally read the whole of it in Latin, and it took me several years, and sometimes fits and starts, 10 lines at a time or so, but I made it through, and it has been profoundly influential on my thinking and on my imagination as well. It's very fertile for the imagination. The images, the descriptions, the way that you said in one of our previous episodes very memorably that Vergil is better than Homer in some ways in how he describes nature.
I stand by that.
Yeah,
I do. There's something about it that of course, the Latin itself, and I think one of the things Lombardo's strengths in his translation, he brings it out.
He does, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this last little bit here before we wrap it up is the question of Vergilian English. Right?
Okay.
So these are the first 10 lines or so of Milton's Paradise Lost. Did you ever take a class on Milton or study any Milton?
I never did. I never did. Nope.
So as an undergrad, I studied a little bit of Milton with I think it's Ed Erickson.
Yeah.
A former Calvin prof.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, he's now passed on to glory. But he was a great lover of Milton and tried to impart to me that same kind of admiration. Never took.
Never really?
No.
No?
Milton leaves me cold.
Okay.
So I can recognize the brilliance of his poetry, but it's not interesting to me in the same way that the Aeneid is.
Gotcha.
But here are some English hexameters.
All right.
So I thought we should just read a few and people can see, does it have appeal?
Yep.
Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat, sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd, who first taught the chosen seed, in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos, or of Zion hill, delight thee more, and Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God. I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Ionian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme.
Oh, that's really interesting.
One giant sentence.
But he's kind of following the epic tradition of not invoking the muses.
That's right.
But wanting his poem blessed by God.
Yes. Yeah. The heavenly muse is the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And it's packed with literary allusions. So I guess I compare it to Ovid, right? Ovid's showing off his mythological knowledge, but Ovid's funny.
Milton not funny?
Milton showing off his mythological knowledge and scriptural knowledge, but not appealing to me in the same way.
I can understand
Doesn't have the same kind of wit.
Yeah.
And now we're going to get a lot of hate mail from
all those Milton lovers.
All those Miltonites.
Hey, bring it on.
That's right.
I mean, I would love to hear if our listeners are Milton lovers. What do you love about it?
That's right.
Yeah,
maybe we'll devote an episode to it sometime.
Or at the very least, a shout out. I think it would be perfect.
To John Milton?
Well, not to shout to John Milton, but to talking about a listener's take on Milton.
That would be good.
I'd like to hear that.
Kind of the counter argument.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Something like, you guys at the end of episode 120, you kind of were not fair to Milton, and here's why.
Here's right. You rubes, you Philistines, right? Exactly. Right.
We'd love to hear it. You bumpkins, you hayseeds.
Exactly.
All right. let's wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up. Dave, before we go, tell us a little bit about the Moss method and about LLPSI. What you got going on?
I'd love to do that. So we're still teaching Greek, still teaching Latin. For those who want to study Greek, I can take you from neophyte
to erudite.
That's correct. Go to mossmethod.com. Check out my program. 40 videos in Module 1, 40 lessons, 6 quizzes, 2 exams. You can start with little or no knowledge of Greek and come to a pretty high level of competency in just one module. Plus thousands of free lessons, almost 2,000 now, online at my YouTube page. That's youtube.com/latinperdiem.com. If you want to study Latin, I'll be brief. Go to latinperdiem.com. I have a course that's built on Hans Orberg's Lingua Latina per se illustrata, features 33 classroom sessions plus about 20 some office hours that are recorded. And really, there's no reason not to study Greek or Latin at this point.
Sounds great. So I mentioned the websites once again for both of those.
Yes, it's at mossmethod.com and latinperdiem.com. Just click around on there. You'll find it. There's some awkward videos of me trying to appeal to the camera and so forth. But the programs themselves, I think, once again, they may not be the best, but they are, I'm sure, the best value, the combination of expertise and an affordable cost.
Please, so yes, track those down. All right. Before we go, thanks as always to Mishka, our intrepid engineer. I'm always amazed about her fast turnaround time.
And the quality of the work she produces, too, amazing.
Amazing. Yep. So thanks, Mishka. Scott Van Zen, Ken Tamplin, these are the guys behind the great music that you hear throughout the episode.
It's a little bluesy. It's a little rock.
Right.
We've got the bumper music. That's really nice for the ads.
It's balancing kind of civilization and savagery with just his tone.
There you go.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, there you go.
So, Dave, if people want to get in touch with us, what should they do?
Right, they should send emails to jeff@adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V.
Or to dave@adnauseum.com. Also, don't forget the V.
You can pick up some summer merchandise if you'd like. A shirt that says Quae Nocent Docent, this Erasmian tag, Pathemata Mathemata.
So we're getting into T-shirt weather here in Michigan, so that means it's got to be T-shirt weather in most places.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And it's a good deal. Get a hat, get some other paraphernalia. Mm-hmm. Jeff, we haven't really decided what we're doing next week.
Well, no, we've done 30 Aeneid episodes. We're done with the Aeneid. I don't know. What are we going to do?
Should we take a break for a year?
It feels like a break is necessary, but we can't take a break. We have to keep going. So
we got a number of different things we can cover, including some very interesting guests coming up.
Yes.
In not too long. See, this has been kind of the downside of spending so much time on the Aeneid is not time for guests.
Right. It's been a while since we've done a good interview. But we got one coming up, and I'm very excited about it.
Yes, should be excellent.
So we're just going to keep the audience in suspense
about
let's do that. What's on tap for next week.
They don't have to, they're not on a need-to-know basis.
Exactly right. So, and I believe, Dave, you have our gustatory parting shot today?
Yes, I do. So this is a classic. This is from Brian Regan.
Yes.
And I think I actually heard this quote. You queued this up for me, but I heard this quote more than a decade ago.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it's very funny, but I don't know if I can do it justice.
Really?
He's got a fantastic delivery, this guy.
I mean, there's the whole visual element to it. But,
but
do the best you can.
All right, here we go. So my doctor told me to watch what I'm eating, to read food labels. I'm in the store reading the Fig Newtons label. I've always liked Fig Newtons. I'm reading the label to make sure everything's fine. Fat, content, calories. I look at the serving size. 2 cookies. Who eats 2 cookies? I eat Fig Newtons by the sleeve. 2 sleeves is a serving size. I open them both and eat them like a tree chipper. Fig Newton shavings coming off the side.
Well done.
Thanks, Dave.